Hello there, Internet and beautiful creatures of the beyond. Good to see you again. Hope you are all doing great and you're having a fantastic day or night. I was wondering what most inspires me, generally speaking. And one aspect of my personal art is the inspiration from nature. And we often talk about evolution and adaptation and how things manage to survive in this world. And the first thing we think about evolution is ourselves, of course, because, yeah, we are the base. But in reality, we are not. As much as we try to evade nature and we put all these concrete structures around us to keep nature outside of our lives, we are dependent on nature. We are dependent on oxygen, on uh, nutrients from nature, and so many other things, including water and etc. And when we're thinking about evolution, we're thinking about the basic cells that develop into life and then created the more complex creatures that migrated to land and eventually became into us. But the reality is there was a previous evolution that happened before us or before our species. And that is the evolution of plants. Because the first thing that developed living things that developed on this planet were the plants. And the basic theory of how life evolved is that first it has developed into the ocean. And because of the volcanic vents and in combination with the chemical reactants in the water and so on, life was generated somehow. And the first type of protoplants were the algae family. And interestingly enough, vegetation migrated towards land as well, because as tides went up and down, the algae also started to adapt to the medium outside of the water, and they have developed into new type of vegetation. And there is one particular vegetation that I want to talk about, um, and this one is called a moss. And perhaps most of you know what a moss is, but just in case you haven't heard of a moss is basically a non-vascular flower plant, flowerless plant. Sorry, Um and it's part of the bryophyte family. And basically, what it means, this plant can survive in absence of other vegetation. So it has no seeds, it has no roots, and it can grow basically anywhere. It's a very resilient plant, and Japanese people have an affinity for mosses. They they are part of their culture in a way. It symbolizes purity and equilibrium, uniformity, because when it grows sort of like this rug all over the place, and it's uniform and it's all the same type of color, that uniform green, as we can see in our beautiful video that I have put on the background. And this a very appealing plant, and it has many properties that a lot of scientists find intriguing. For example, this plant generally, mm, well, not pollinates, what's the word? It has spores. In order to reproduce, it has spores, and all it needs is a little bit of water. And the the thing is that this plant can be found from some of the harshest parts of our planet, around volcanic lands, up to some parts in Greenland, for example, and I find this funny that in Greenland everything is frozen, and in Iceland everything is green. But anyway, so in Greenland, when there's a lot of snow and a lot of cold weather, mosses still persist over there, and there's they don't need a lot of water either. They collect um, moisture from the atmosphere, and in their entirety, they're kind of their own biosystem because they're like a little jungle, and they create their like the most amazing thing that I liked about mosses is that they are home to my favorite microscopic animal, which is the water bear. You should highly check out what a water bear is. It's just such an amazing creature, and they're cute. Um, and oh, interesting thing about mosses is like they can clone themselves, but that is actually a wrong analysis because they do not clone. Mosses are sort of this colony of cells that coexist with each other. And the moment a piece of it is broken and is taken by the wind and thrown in some crevice somewhere, it can start regenerating to grow to a full plant itself. Although it's not exactly the same plant, obviously, but scientists kind of think like, oh, it's a clone because it took a part of the cells that were from the original plant. But in actuality, those cells have their own individuality, if we can call it like that. So yeah, interesting aspect. Um, and they were like thinking of terraforming Mars, and the way our planet was terraformed, mm, basically meaning that the oxygen has been released into our atmosphere, was through mosses initially. So it is possible that we, instead of using all those sci-fi technology that we think about generally about these big power plants that emit various type of gases to warm the planet and make the planet has its own atmospheric cycle, we just put a bunch of mosses over there and they grow on their own. Obviously, they grow very slow, but they're very resilient. And interestingly enough, they can also go into hibernation. So if there is a lack of water, they kind of create this cocoon around itself. And the moment it receives a little bit of water, it just revives instantly. It's just wow. And it can go into hibernation for long periods of time. And it grows uniformly. So it kind of can get thicker, and the more thicker it is, the older it is. So there's like evidence that there are mosses in some parts of the world that are thousands of years old. So yeah, they are quite persistent, probably even immortal. But obviously, immortality in such organisms is very possible because the organism itself of the plant is very simplistic. So we know of other creatures in the ocean that regenerate their life cycles, and they kind of go. I think there was a type of jellyfish that um, reverses its aging. It goes from being old towards being young again. But it's a very, very simplistic organism. So for them, it's a defensive mechanism. But of course, that doesn't mean they are safe from being eaten by other animals. They just manage to live a very long time. In our case, well, I don't see this happening anytime soon. Immortality is probably something that we would not consider a blessing because our mental cells, from what we know so far, are not capable to regenerate to some degree. So we will lose our minds before we lose our body. But yeah, uh, mosses, they're very amazing. And if you see moss in the wild, especially there is this myth about the fact that mosses grow on trees on the north side, and that is partially true, but it depends where you live, because if you live in the northern hemisphere of the planet, obviously that's on the north is gonna be the most shade, and moss is kind of like this humid, shaded places, so it grows more on that side. But if it's on the southern hemisphere, yeah, guess where it grows? On the southern part of any trees, and they don't invade um, in the sense that this plant is autonomous. So, for example, when it grows on trees, it does not use the moisture from within the tree or anything. It just climbs on the tree, and it gives many. It has many benefactors to the tree because it gives some protection from the elements to its roots and to its bark and so on. So it's a very amazing plant. But in some parts of the world, it is seen as a parasitic plant, and people associate it with mold and disease and so on. But in reality, it's not. It's a very unique kind of plant. And it will probably exist way before we disappear as a species. Because I always find it funny that we say, oh, save the planet, save the planet. The planet does not need saving. We need saving. We are capable of destroying ourselves as a species, but nature always finds a way to sprout and recreate life, even if we decimate it to 99% of the surface of the planet. And even if we eradicate all planet and try to sterilize the life on this planet, life will still spark somehow in another way, just as it did millions of years before when it first sprouted in the oceans. So yeah, nature is awesome. That's why I always respect it and get inspired by what it can do and how diverse and complementary it is to each individual thing that exists in it, including plants and animals. So when we look at nature, we should see see it as our home, not something that is outside of our lives. And the more we integrate that, the more easier it is for us to come with new interesting ideas. For example, the Fibonacci string or the golden ratio was inspired by the spiral of this sea shell. I don't know. It's a specific spiral shell. I don't remember the name. A Nautilus shell, I think it's called. And obviously, the ratio does not apply perfectly to patterns in nature, but it is an interesting model to see that it recurs over and over in various types of organisms all around us. But yeah, that's a whole nother topic. Well, I guess you guys found mosses more interesting today than you did before. And well, I hope you guys have a wonderful day or night there. See ya. Bye 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 bye.